It was a chilly morning in a small town, where the streets were quiet except for the occasional sound of footsteps crunching on frost-covered pavement. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the rooftops. In a modest corner of the town, a young man was walking to work, his hands buried deep in his pockets to shield them from the cold. He wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd, average height, plain clothes, and a quiet demeanor. But this particular morning, he was about to do something that would change not just his life, but the lives of many others. As he passed by a narrow alley, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry a heavy bag of groceries. Her steps were slow and unsteady, and she looked like she might collapse under the weight. Without a second thought, the young man approached her. "Let me help you with that," he said gently, taking the bag from her hands. The woman looked up, surprised but grateful, and nodded with a faint smile. She led him to her small apartment a few blocks away, and he carried the bag all the way to her kitchen. The woman, who lived alone, was touched by his kindness. She offered him a cup of tea, and they sat together for a while, talking about life. She shared stories of her younger days, and he listened intently, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. Before he left, she thanked him again, her eyes glistening with tears. "You've made an old woman very happy today," she said. The young man smiled and waved goodbye, not realizing that this simple act of kindness would set off a chain reaction he could never have imagined. Later that day, the elderly woman couldn't stop thinking about the young man's gesture. It had been a long time since someone had shown her such genuine care. Inspired by his kindness, she decided to pay it forward. She baked a batch of cookies and took them to her neighbor, a single mother who had been having a tough time balancing work and raising her 2 young children. The mother was overwhelmed by the gesture. She had been feeling isolated and exhausted, and the cookies, along with the elderly woman's warm smile, gave her a much-needed boost of hope. The single mother, in turn, felt inspired to spread kindness herself. The next day, she volunteered to help at a local community center, where she spent time with children who came from difficult backgrounds. Her presence brought joy to the kids, and one of them, a shy boy who rarely spoke, opened up to her about his dreams of becoming an artist. The mother encouraged him, telling him that he could achieve anything if he believed in himself. Her words stuck with the boy, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of confidence. The boy went home that day and started drawing. He poured his heart into his artwork, creating a beautiful piece that he decided to share with his classmates. His teacher was so impressed that she entered his drawing into a local art competition. To everyone's surprise, the boy won first prize. The recognition not only boosted his self-esteem but also inspired other kids in his class to pursue their own passions. Meanwhile, the young man who had started it all continued with his daily routine, unaware of the ripple effect his small act of kindness had created. But life has a way of bringing things full circle. One evening, as he was walking home from work, he noticed a flyer for the local art competition. Curious, he decided to attend the exhibition. As he walked through the gallery, he came across the winning piece, a stunning drawing that seemed to radiate hope and resilience. He read the artist's name and realized it was the same boy he had indirectly inspired through his act of kindness. The young man felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that even the smallest gestures can have a profound impact. He left the exhibition with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to continue spreading kindness wherever he went. Little did he know, his journey was far from over, and the chain reaction he had sparked was still unfolding in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As the days turned into weeks, the town began to change. People started looking out for one another, offering help without being asked, and sharing smiles with strangers. The atmosphere became warmer, more connected, and full of hope. It was as if the young man's single act of kindness had planted a seed that grew into a tree, its branches reaching out to touch countless lives. And so, the story continued, each act of kindness leading to another, creating a web of compassion that stretched far beyond the town's borders. The young man, the elderly woman, the single mother, the shy boy, and everyone else who had been touched by this chain reaction were proof that even in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, a little kindness can go a long way. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to start something beautiful. The young man's life continued quietly, but the ripples of his kindness were far from fading. The town, once just a place where people lived side by side without much interaction, was slowly transforming. Neighbors who had never spoken before were now exchanging greetings. Strangers were holding doors open for one another. The air felt lighter, as if the collective weight of loneliness and indifference had been lifted. One afternoon, the young man was walking through the park, a place he often visited to clear his mind. He noticed a group of teenagers sitting on a bench, laughing and chatting. Among them was the shy boy whose artwork had won the competition. The boy, who once kept to himself, was now surrounded by friends, his face glowing with confidence. The young man smiled to himself, feeling a quiet pride in knowing he had played a small part in this transformation. But the chain reaction didn't stop there. The boy's newfound confidence had inspired his friends to pursue their own passions. One of them, a girl who loved writing, started a blog where she shared stories about kindness and community. Her words resonated with people far beyond the town, and soon, her blog had readers from all over the world. One of those readers was a man living in a bustling city, hundreds of miles away. He had been feeling disconnected and cynical, but the girl's stories reminded him of the power of small, meaningful actions. Inspired, the man decided to do something kind for a stranger. He bought a cup of coffee for a homeless person he often passed on his way to work. The homeless man, who had been invisible to most people, was deeply moved by the gesture. It wasn't just the coffee, it was the fact that someone had seen him, acknowledged him, and treated him with dignity. That small act of kindness gave him the strength to reach out to a local shelter, where he found the support he needed to turn his life around. Meanwhile, back in the small town, the elderly woman who had baked cookies for her neighbor was also experiencing the effects of the kindness chain. Her neighbor, the single mother, had started volunteering regularly at the community center, and her children often joined her. The mother's older child, a girl with a knack for organizing, decided to start a donation drive for families in need. She rallied her classmates, and together, they collected clothes, food, and toys for those less fortunate. The donation drive was a huge success, and the local newspaper covered the story. The article caught the attention of a retired teacher living in a nearby town. She had been feeling restless, unsure of how to spend her time after decades of teaching. Reading about the children's initiative inspired her to start a mentorship program for young people in her community. She reached out to the girl who had organized the donation drive, and the two began exchanging ideas. Their collaboration led to the creation of a network of mentorship programs that spread to several towns, helping countless young people find guidance and support. As the weeks turned into months, the young man who had started it all began to notice the changes around him. The town felt different, more alive, more connected. People smiled more, and there was a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. He didn't take credit for any of it. In fact, he rarely thought about the moment he had helped the elderly woman with her groceries. To him, it had been a small, instinctive act, nothing extraordinary. But to those whose lives had been touched by the chain reaction he had sparked, it was so much more. One day, as he was walking home from work, he saw a poster on a bulletin board. It was an announcement for a community event celebrating kindness and community spirit. The event was organized by the same group of teenagers who had been inspired by the shy boy's artwork. The young man decided to attend, curious to see what they had planned. The event was held in the park, and it was unlike anything the town had ever seen. There were booths offering free food, games for children, and live music performed by local artists. People of all ages had come together to celebrate the spirit of kindness that had taken root in their community. The young man wandered through the crowd, taking it all in. He saw the elderly woman chatting with the single mother, the shy boy showing his artwork to a group of admirers, and the girl who had started the blog signing copies of a book she had published. As he stood there, watching the joy and connection around him, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that kindness wasn't just about helping one person, it was about creating a ripple effect that could touch countless lives. And while he had played a small part in starting it, the real magic was in how everyone had come together to keep it going. The event ended with a speech by the retired teacher who had started the mentorship program. She spoke about the power of small acts of kindness and how they could transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. "Every one of us has the power to make a difference," she said. "It doesn't take much, just a little bit of care, a little bit of effort. And when we all come together, we can create something truly beautiful." The young man left the event with a full heart, knowing that the chain reaction he had sparked was far from over. It was growing, spreading, and touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. And as he walked home under the stars, he felt a quiet hope for the future, a future where kindness was the norm, not the exception. The community event celebrating kindness had left a lasting impression on everyone who attended. It wasn't just a one-time gathering, it became a turning point for the town. People began to see their community in a new light, not just as a place to live, but as a place where they could make a difference. The young man, who had unknowingly set this chain reaction in motion, continued his quiet life, but he couldn't help noticing how the town seemed to hum with a new energy. One morning, as he walked to work, he noticed a group of volunteers cleaning up the park. They were picking up litter, planting flowers, and painting benches. Among them was the shy boy who had won the art competition. The boy waved at him, and the young man stopped to chat. "We're trying to make the park a better place for everyone," the boy explained, his voice filled with pride. The young man smiled and offered to help, spending his lunch break planting flowers alongside the volunteers. The park cleanup project was just one of many initiatives that had sprung up in the town. The single mother, inspired by the kindness she had received, started a support group for other parents struggling to balance work and family life. The group met every week, offering advice, encouragement, and a sense of community to its members. One of the mothers in the group, who had been feeling overwhelmed and isolated, found the courage to go back to school and pursue her dream of becoming a nurse. Her journey inspired others in the group to chase their own dreams, creating a cycle of empowerment and hope. Meanwhile, the elderly woman who had baked cookies for her neighbor continued to spread kindness in her own way. She started visiting a local nursing home, where she spent time with residents who rarely had visitors. Her stories and laughter brought joy to people who often felt forgotten. One of the residents, a man who had once been a teacher, was inspired by her visits to start a book club at the nursing home. The book club became a place where residents could share their thoughts, memories, and dreams, creating a sense of connection and purpose. The ripple effect of kindness wasn't confined to the town. The girl who had started the blog about kindness and community continued to write, and her stories reached people all over the world. One of her readers, a woman living in a different country, was inspired to start a kindness project in her own community. She organized a food drive that provided meals for hundreds of families in need. The success of the food drive led to the creation of a non-profit organization dedicated to fighting hunger and poverty. Back in the small town, the young man began to see how all these acts of kindness were interconnected. It was as if each act was a thread, weaving together a tapestry of compassion and hope. He realized that kindness wasn't just about helping others, it was about creating a world where everyone felt valued and supported. And while he had played a small part in starting this movement, he knew that it was the collective effort of everyone involved that made it so powerful. One evening, as he sat in the park watching the sunset, he thought about how much had changed since that chilly morning when he had helped the elderly woman with her groceries. He had never expected anything in return, but the kindness he had shown had come back to him in ways he couldn't have imagined. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the kindness he had received, but for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than himself. As the days went by, the young man continued to look for ways to spread kindness. He started small, offering a smile to a stranger or holding the door open for someone. But he also began to think about how he could make a bigger impact. He remembered the retired teacher's words at the community event, "Every one of us has the power to make a difference." Those words stayed with him, guiding his actions and inspiring him to do more. One day, he decided to organize a kindness challenge in the town. The challenge was simple: perform one act of kindness every day for a week and share your experience with others. The idea caught on quickly, and soon, people all over the town were participating. They shared their stories on social media, inspiring others to join in. The challenge brought the community even closer together, creating a sense of unity and shared purpose. The young man was amazed by the response. He had never expected his idea to take off the way it did, but he was grateful for the opportunity to see the power of kindness in action. As he watched the town come together, he felt a deep sense of hope for the future. He knew that the chain reaction he had sparked was far from over, and that it would continue to grow and touch lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And so, the story continued, each act of kindness adding to the tapestry of compassion and hope. The young man, the elderly woman, the single mother, the shy boy, and everyone else who had been touched by this chain reaction were proof that even in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, a little kindness can go a long way. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to start something beautiful. The kindness challenge had taken the town by storm. What started as a simple idea had grown into a movement that brought people together in ways no one could have predicted. The young man who had initiated the challenge was amazed by the stories people shared. A teenager helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries. A shopkeeper gave free meals to struggling families. A group of friends organized a cleanup drive for the local river. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, added to the growing sense of community and connection. But the impact of the challenge didn't stop at the town's borders. The girl who had started the blog about kindness shared the stories from the challenge with her readers, and soon, people from other towns and cities began organizing their own kindness challenges. The ripple effect was spreading far and wide, touching lives in places the young man had never even heard of. One of those places was a bustling city where a young woman had been feeling lost and disconnected. She had moved to the city for work, but the fast-paced, impersonal environment had left her feeling lonely. When she read about the kindness challenge, she decided to give it a try. She started small, buying a coffee for the security guard at her office building. The guard, who was used to being ignored, was so touched by her gesture that he thanked her with a smile that lit up his face. That smile stayed with her all day, reminding her of the power of small acts of kindness. Encouraged, the young woman began looking for more ways to spread kindness. She volunteered at a homeless shelter, where she met a man who had once been a successful musician but had fallen on hard times. She listened to his story and encouraged him to start playing music again. With her support, he began performing at the shelter, bringing joy to everyone who heard him. His music inspired others at the shelter to pursue their own passions, creating a sense of hope and possibility. Back in the small town, the kindness challenge had sparked a new wave of initiatives. The shy boy who had won the art competition decided to use his talent to spread kindness. He started painting murals around the town, each one depicting acts of kindness and community. The murals became a source of inspiration for everyone who saw them, reminding people of the power of compassion and connection. The single mother who had started the support group for parents took her initiative a step further. She partnered with the retired teacher to create a mentorship program for young people in the town. The program paired teenagers with mentors who could guide them in pursuing their dreams. One of the teenagers in the program, a girl who loved science, was paired with a mentor who worked in a research lab. With her mentor's encouragement, the girl applied for a scholarship and was accepted into a prestigious science program. Her success inspired other teenagers in the program to chase their own dreams, creating a cycle of hope and achievement. The elderly woman who had started visiting the nursing home continued to spread kindness in her own quiet way. She began knitting scarves and blankets for the residents, each one made with love and care. The residents cherished her gifts, not just for their warmth, but for the thought and kindness behind them. One of the residents, a woman who had once been a teacher, was inspired by the elderly woman's kindness to start a writing group at the nursing home. The group became a place where residents could share their stories and memories, creating a sense of connection and purpose. As the weeks went by, the young man who had started the kindness challenge began to see how all these acts of kindness were interconnected. It was as if each act was a thread, weaving together a tapestry of compassion and hope. He realized that kindness wasn't just about helping others, it was about creating a world where everyone felt valued and supported. And while he had played a small part in starting this movement, he knew that it was the collective effort of everyone involved that made it so powerful. One evening, as he sat in the park watching the sunset, he thought about how much had changed since that chilly morning when he had helped the elderly woman with her groceries. He had never expected anything in return, but the kindness he had shown had come back to him in ways he couldn't have imagined. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the kindness he had received, but for the opportunity to be part of something bigger than himself. As the days went by, the young man continued to look for ways to spread kindness. He started small, offering a smile to a stranger or holding the door open for someone. But he also began to think about how he could make a bigger impact. He remembered the retired teacher's words at the community event, "Every one of us has the power to make a difference." Those words stayed with him, guiding his actions and inspiring him to do more. One day, he decided to organize a kindness challenge in the town. The challenge was simple: perform one act of kindness every day for a week and share your experience with others. The idea caught on quickly, and soon, people all over the town were participating. They shared their stories on social media, inspiring others to join in. The challenge brought the community even closer together, creating a sense of unity and shared purpose. The young man was amazed by the response. He had never expected his idea to take off the way it did, but he was grateful for the opportunity to see the power of kindness in action. As he watched the town come together, he felt a deep sense of hope for the future. He knew that the chain reaction he had sparked was far from over, and that it would continue to grow and touch lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And so, the story continued, each act of kindness adding to the tapestry of compassion and hope. The young man, the elderly woman, the single mother, the shy boy, and everyone else who had been touched by this chain reaction were proof that even in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, a little kindness can go a long way. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to start something beautiful. The kindness challenge had become a way of life in the small town. What began as a week-long experiment had turned into a daily practice for many. People no longer needed reminders or prompts, kindness had become second nature. The young man who had sparked this movement often found himself marveling at how something so simple had grown into something so profound. But as the days turned into months, he began to notice something even more remarkable: the ripple effect was spreading beyond the town, reaching places and people he had never imagined. One such place was a coastal village hundreds of miles away. A fisherman in the village had stumbled upon the blog written by the girl from the small town. The stories of kindness and community resonated deeply with him. His village had been struggling for years, fishing yields were down, and many families were barely getting by. The sense of hopelessness was palpable. But after reading about the kindness challenge, the fisherman decided to try something different. Instead of competing with his fellow fishermen for the best catch, he began sharing his nets and knowledge with those who were struggling. At first, others were skeptical, but soon they began to see the benefits of working together. The village slowly started to change, as people began to support one another rather than compete. The fisherman's actions didn't go unnoticed. A local journalist heard about the shift in the village and wrote a story about it. The story was picked up by a national newspaper, and soon, people all over the country were talking about the power of kindness and collaboration. The fisherman became a local hero, but he always credited the small town and the young man who had started it all. "Kindness is like a wave," he said in an interview. "Once it starts, it keeps going, touching everything in its path." Back in the small town, the young man was humbled by the fisherman's words. He had never sought recognition or praise, but he couldn't help feeling a sense of pride in knowing that his small act of kindness had inspired someone so far away. It reminded him that kindness knows no boundaries, it can travel across oceans, mountains, and cities, touching lives in ways we can't always see. Meanwhile, the shy boy who had painted the murals around the town was gaining recognition for his work. A local art gallery offered to host an exhibition of his pieces, and people from neighboring towns came to see his art. The boy's murals, which depicted scenes of kindness and community, struck a chord with everyone who saw them. One of the visitors, a teacher from a nearby city, was so inspired that she decided to start an art program for underprivileged children in her community. The program gave children a creative outlet and a sense of purpose, and many of them went on to pursue careers in the arts. The single mother who had started the support group for parents was also seeing the impact of her efforts. The group had grown so large that she decided to turn it into a non-profit organization. The organization provided resources, workshops, and support to parents across the region, helping them navigate the challenges of raising a family. One of the mothers who had benefited from the group went on to start her own business, creating jobs for others in the community. Her success story was featured in a magazine, inspiring even more people to believe in the power of kindness and support. The elderly woman who had been visiting the nursing home continued to spread joy wherever she went. Her knitting projects had grown into a full-blown initiative, with volunteers from the town helping her create scarves, blankets, and hats for those in need. The items were distributed not just in the nursing home, but also to homeless shelters and hospitals. One of the recipients, a young boy undergoing treatment for a serious illness, wrote her a letter thanking her for the blanket she had made. "It feels like a hug," he wrote. The letter brought tears to the elderly woman's eyes and reminded her why she kept doing what she did. As the young man reflected on all these stories, he realized that kindness wasn't just about individual acts, it was about creating a culture of compassion and connection. It was about showing people that they mattered, that their struggles were seen, and that they weren't alone. And while he had played a small part in starting this movement, he knew that it was the collective effort of everyone involved that made it so powerful. One evening, as he walked through the park, he noticed a group of children playing near one of the murals the shy boy had painted. They were laughing and pointing at the images, discussing what kindness meant to them. The young man stopped to listen, feeling a deep sense of hope for the future. These children were growing up in a world where kindness was celebrated, where helping others was the norm rather than the exception. He knew that the chain reaction he had sparked would continue through them, touching lives for generations to come. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the town, the young man felt a sense of peace. He had never set out to change the world, but he had learned that even the smallest actions could have a profound impact. And while he didn't know what the future held, he was certain of one thing: kindness would always be at the heart of everything he did. The small town had become a beacon of kindness, a place where people from all walks of life came to see what it meant to truly care for one another. Visitors often left inspired, carrying the spirit of kindness back to their own communities. The young man who had started it all continued to live his quiet life, but he couldn't help feeling a sense of awe at how far the ripple effect had spread. What had begun as a simple act of helping an elderly woman with her groceries had grown into a movement that was changing lives across the country, and beyond. One day, the young man received a letter in the mail. It was from a schoolteacher in a distant city. She had read about the kindness challenge and decided to bring it to her classroom. Her students, many of whom came from challenging backgrounds, had embraced the idea wholeheartedly. They started small, holding doors open for each other and sharing their lunches with classmates who didn't have enough to eat. But soon, their acts of kindness grew bigger. They organized a fundraiser to buy winter coats for children in need and wrote letters of encouragement to patients in a local hospital. The teacher's letter was filled with gratitude. "Your story inspired me to teach my students about the power of kindness," she wrote. "And now, they're inspiring others. Thank you for showing us that even the smallest actions can make a difference." The young man was deeply moved by her words. He had never thought of himself as an inspiration, but he realized that his story had become a catalyst for change in ways he could never have imagined. Meanwhile, the shy boy who had painted the murals around the town was invited to speak at a national art conference. His story of how art and kindness had transformed his life resonated with the audience, many of whom were artists and educators. After his speech, a woman approached him with tears in her eyes. She was a teacher from a struggling school district, and she had been feeling overwhelmed by the challenges her students faced. The boy's story gave her hope. "I'm going to start an art program at my school," she said. "I want my students to know that their voices matter, just like yours does." The boy smiled, feeling a sense of pride and purpose. He had once been too shy to speak up, but now he was using his voice to inspire others. It was a reminder that kindness wasn't just about actions, it was also about sharing stories, lifting others up, and showing them what was possible. Back in the town, the single mother who had started the non-profit organization for parents was seeing the impact of her work on a larger scale. Her organization had partnered with businesses, schools, and community centers to provide resources and support to families across the region. One of the mothers who had benefited from the program wrote her a heartfelt letter, sharing how the organization had helped her overcome addiction and rebuild her life. "You showed me that I wasn't alone," the letter said. "And because of you, I can be the mother my children deserve." The elderly woman who had been knitting scarves and blankets for those in need was also seeing the ripple effect of her kindness. Her knitting group had grown into a community-wide initiative, with people of all ages joining in. The items they created were sent not just to local shelters and hospitals, but also to disaster-stricken areas around the world. One of the recipients, a family who had lost everything in a hurricane, sent a thank you note that brought tears to the elderly woman's eyes. "Your blankets kept us warm during our darkest days," they wrote. "But more than that, they reminded us that there is still good in the world." As the young man reflected on all these stories, he realized that kindness was like a seed. Once planted, it could grow in ways that were impossible to predict. It could take root in the most unlikely places, blooming into something beautiful and transformative. And while he had planted the first seed, it was the collective effort of everyone involved that had allowed it to flourish. One evening, as he walked through the park, he noticed a group of teenagers gathered near one of the murals. They were discussing how they could spread kindness in their school. One of them suggested starting a peer mentorship program, while another talked about organizing a community garden. The young man listened quietly, feeling a sense of hope for the future. These teenagers were the next generation of kindness ambassadors, and they were already finding ways to make the world a better place. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the town, the young man felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had never set out to change the world, but he had learned that even the smallest actions could have a profound impact. And while he didn't know what the future held, he was certain of one thing: kindness would always be at the heart of everything he did. The story of the small town and its kindness movement had become something of a legend. People from all over the world reached out, asking how they could bring the same spirit of compassion to their own communities. The young man, who had once lived a quiet, unassuming life, found himself at the center of it all. But he never forgot where it had started, with a simple act of helping an elderly woman carry her groceries. That moment, so small and unremarkable at the time, had set off a chain reaction that was still unfolding in ways he could never have imagined. One day, the young man received an invitation to speak at a global conference on community building and social change. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't a public speaker or a leader, he was just an ordinary person who had done what felt right. But then he thought about all the people who had been inspired by his story: the fisherman, the teacher, the shy boy, the single mother, the elderly woman, and countless others. He realized that his story wasn't just his own, it belonged to everyone who had been part of this movement. And so, he accepted the invitation. The conference was held in a bustling city, far from the quiet streets of his hometown. As he stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces, he felt a mix of nerves and gratitude. He began by telling the story of that chilly morning when he had helped the elderly woman with her groceries. He spoke about how that small act had sparked a chain reaction, touching lives in ways he could never have predicted. He shared stories of the people who had been inspired to spread kindness: the fisherman who had transformed his village, the teacher who had brought the kindness challenge to her classroom, the shy boy who had used his art to inspire others, the single mother who had built a non-profit to support families, and the elderly woman who had knitted warmth and hope for those in need. The audience listened in rapt silence, moved by the power of his story. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. People lined up to thank him, to share their own stories of kindness, and to ask how they could bring this movement to their own communities. The young man felt humbled and inspired. He realized that kindness wasn't just about individual acts, it was about creating a culture where compassion and connection were valued above all else. After the conference, the young man returned to his hometown, but he knew that his journey was far from over. The kindness movement had taken on a life of its own, and he was determined to keep it going. He started a foundation dedicated to promoting kindness and community building, providing resources and support to people who wanted to make a difference in their own neighborhoods. The foundation quickly gained traction, with volunteers and donors from all over the world joining the cause. Meanwhile, the shy boy who had painted the murals around the town was offered a scholarship to study art at a prestigious university. He accepted, but he promised to return to the town one day to create more murals and inspire others. The Single Mothers non-profit organization continued to grow, helping thousands of families across the region. The Elderly Woman's Knitting Initiative expanded into a global network, with volunteers in dozens of countries creating handmade items for those in need. As the years went by, the young man often thought about the chain reaction he had sparked. It had started with a single act of kindness, but it had grown into something much bigger, a movement that was changing the world, one small act at a time. He knew that he would never be able to measure the full impact of what he had started, but he didn't need to. The stories of kindness and connection that he heard every day were proof enough. One evening, as he walked through the park, he noticed a group of children playing near one of the murals the shy boy had painted. They were laughing and pointing at the images, discussing what kindness meant to them. The young man stopped to listen, feeling a deep sense of hope for the future. These children were growing up in a world where kindness was celebrated, where helping others was the norm rather than the exception. He knew that the chain reaction he had sparked would continue through them, touching lives for generations to come. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the town, the young man felt a sense of peace. He had never set out to change the world, but he had learned that even the smallest actions could have a profound impact. And while he didn't know what the future held, he was certain of one thing: kindness would always be at the heart of everything he did. And so, the story continued, each act of kindness adding to the tapestry of compassion and hope. The young man, the elderly woman, the single mother, the shy boy, and everyone else who had been touched by this chain reaction were proof that even in a world that often feels cold and indifferent, a little kindness can go a long way. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to start something beautiful.